And I now invite Tom Nowlin to come forward and light the chalice and lead us in our affirmation of covenant, which is printed in your order of service.
Good morning. I light this chalice with these words: open our eyes to see what is beautiful, open our minds to learn what is true, open our hearts to love one another. Please join me in the affirmation of covenant, which you will find printed in your order of service, saying,
Love is the doctrine of this church, the quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
Week before last, I attended my study group's annual retreat. There are 11 UU ministers in the group. About half of us have been members 20 years or more. About half, the other half, about 10 years or less. I think we range in age between 30 and 80, and in active service as parish ministers between about 10 and 32 years. 4 of us are male. Only one is actually a straight white male, but it's okay, he's retired. Our process involves 3 of us writing what we call major papers. That's about 20 double-spaced pages in 12-point type. I can't remember what that is in terms of number of words. 3 others write response papers, which are shorter. One of us has the responsibility for the retreat schedule and keeping us on track, and the rest lead one of 4 short worship services during our time together. Our theme this year was When Boundaries Shift or Loosen. When we left our retreat a year ago, we set the theme for the next year at the end of each retreat. So when we left a year ago, each of us writing a major paper had a clear idea of what we were going to write about, but I'm not sure any of us knew exactly what our theme meant. Looking back, I can at least see a trajectory of our themes. 3 years ago, we wrote papers that in different ways responded to the then newly proposed Article 2 for the UUA bylaws, the 6 values with love at the center flower. You've seen that figure, or also it is known as Jet Pig. 2 years ago, our theme was accountability. And that flowed naturally because Article 2 is our account of ourselves, of our tradition and values to ourselves and to the world. 1 year ago, as if in reaction to so deep a focus on accountability, our theme was pleasure. Is there any room for joy in this faith, or is it all about responsibility and accountability? One of my colleagues wrote a paper that year titled, "Does the church ruin everything?" So this year's theme feels to me like we were grappling with the challenge of absorbing a significant change to our collective account of ourselves, even as all around us, core social and cultural and political norms were being unsettled and challenged. Maybe it wasn't so much that we were living in times when boundaries shift and loosen as it was that we are feeling like it's harder to find our spiritual or moral footing with so many familiar landmarks and patterns shifting and loosening around us. I wrote one of the major papers this year. The other two were an account of how Unitarian Universalist international relationships are now being rethought. And the other was reflections on Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. So again, these reflected on changes within Unitarian Universalist institutions and changes in the wider world. One theme we kept coming back to from the paper about Hannah Arendt's thought was her implicit belief in a radically open future, a future that is always in our hands. Arendt had an elevated idea of democracy, a means of collective discernment toward a shared vision. She believed that if we got into democratic dialogue, we would do that. We would find a shared vision and discern a way forward. The author of the paper about her was clear in his mind that now is not a come to the table moment, but a defend democracy moment. But also that here in our churches, we preserve ways of being together that bring more light and warmth into the world, more possibility to overcome oppressions and evils, and more openness to new leaders, new ideas, new ways that move us toward true collective liberation. One of my retreat colleagues confessed that she used to say, if one of our church programs could be done at the public library, it should be done there. And that she had been wrong about that. Now, she said, in these times, it might be that our churches need to step up to make sure that such programs are available and accessible enough. And she added a challenge. She believes now that every church should know how much property tax it would be paying were it not exempt, and then ask itself whether it is giving that value back to the community. I titled my paper, Parish Ministry in a World of Shifting and Loosening Boundaries. I didn't know what that meant when I started writing. My point of departure was a trend that I've noticed among more recently ordained UU ministers, not always, but often younger adults. Many of them take refuge in the notion that ministry is a profession. They adopt a posture of professional distance, and they end up holding their congregations at arm's length, and so fail to make a good pastoral connection. As many a church consultant would predict, they seldom last more than 3 years at a given congregation. My retreat colleagues noted that this trend has coincided with what has been called the feminization of ministry. As more women and queer folk have entered the ministry, many have felt a particular need to shore up their ministerial authority and credentials with a professional attitude. That does describe some of the situations I had in mind. It can also be, as it was for me in my first settlement, which coincided with 9/11, that unsettled times cause us all to become so impatient with each other's imperfections that we can't work together to make a ministry good and lasting. And sometimes it's just what we can only imprecisely name as chemistry that cuts a ministry short. For reasons nobody can pinpoint, sometimes it's unrecognized cultural differences, even such regional differences as East Coast, West Coast, Midwestern, Southern. For some reason, it just doesn't click. My paper was a meditation on what makes ministries last. I organized it around a metaphor of the flaming chalice. Here's a condensed version. A settled ministry is like a chalice lit for an hour, From a spark or an already sustained flame, the chalice is lit. A reserve of oil and a supply of oxygen sustain it. When the hour has run its course, or when the oil runs out, or the oxygen is cut off, the flame is extinguished. While in many ways, training, continuing education, mutual support, compensation standards, it makes sense for ministers to function like professionals, it is not very likely that professional distance contributes anything helpful to our churches. More likely, such distance discourages the initial spark, the bond and depth of connection necessary for a ministry to thrive. We usually speak instead of holding healthy boundaries. This is the hard word for our governing documents team. Holding healthy boundaries. Implicit in that framing, holding healthy boundaries, I think, is holding a healthy and holy intimacy. When there's a lot of love in a church, visitors feel it. So does the minister. And so do our neighbors when we work in partnership with other organizations and churches in the community and build enduring relationships. Embodied practices of warm welcome, intentional connection, pursuit of friendship, friendly curiosity, attentive mutual care. These things sustain a church's culture of love and service and shared ministry. Love so embodied is the oil that helps the church realize its capacity and potential and character. Enduring relationships with the wider community are the oxygen that lets the church's light shine. When ill winds blow, a church engaged with its neighbors, with neighboring faith and civic institutions, and with local and state political affairs, is well positioned to survive a hostile atmosphere. The wick connects oil and oxygen, sustaining the flame. A wick has to be trimmed, just exposed enough to sustain a steady flame, and deep enough in the oil to wick it up. It has to be shielded from ill winds that could blow it out. That's what the cup of the flaming chalice is for. The same embodied practices that sustain the church from within, the oil, sustain its connections beyond itself. And maybe, when combined with courage, they also help us reach and sustain a holy intimacy with good boundaries, long-lasting ministries, and vital congregations. That's my paper distilled to its central idea. Our discussion at the retreat ranged over the different elements of the metaphor, the spark, the oil, the oxygen, and the wick. We noted that intimacy is not so much a state as a dynamic. To develop intimacy takes skill and a safe and supportive context. When we focus on or fret about good boundaries, we are leaning into matters of context or governing documents. Matters of context. We're setting limits. That's worthwhile. And that focus or fret can distract us from the skills involved and the discipline it takes to develop and use them effectively. And we remind ourselves of the values we seek to live into both in private and collective spiritual practices like this hour on Sunday. But we live our faith in embodied practices like the ones I listed before: warm welcome, intentional connection, pursuit of friendship, friendly curiosity, and attentive mutual care. Faith is a way of moving and being in the world, a dynamic between us. and to develop the skills to embody such practices and move and be in the world as our best selves, that's faith development. Why are we so inclined to address context rather than skills? Well, I blame the ATM. Or we can blame Donald Wetzel if we want to. He worked for a company that made automated baggage handling and gasoline pumps, and he developed the country's first automatic teller machine, installed September of 1969 on New York's Long Island at Chemical Bank's Rockville Center branch. If you want to go see a historic monument, go get some money out of that cash machine. I mean, that's where it all started, right? Not really. After all, we already had the gas pumps and the baggage claim. Well, rather than place blame, we might simply observe our collective cultural habit of automating everything we possibly can. Sometimes automation is helpful, like cruise control, for instance. Sometimes it's irresponsible, like a self-driving car. And sometimes it's an obstacle to developing our skills, or an excuse not to. Part of our conversation at the retreat was about the vulnerability of developing skills and the ways we try to avoid danger while learning. I'm going to break from my script for a moment and just note that theme of trust we had that we started with the time all together. I had half of this sermon written. I sent the first half to Finn and said, here's the direction I'm going, maybe something about how hard it is to ask for help. And that's what you got. Because I trusted them. I trusted them. It's good. Now, where was I? The ways we try to avoid danger while learning. That brought to mind the hat and where the danger zone is and the brim and right, all of that. So, for example, there's a whole literature about teaching that proposes that effective teaching incites in the student a desire to learn, and explores how passionate engagement and intellectual connection can do that. This literature calls attention to the danger involved in such passionate connection by calling it an erotic element in teaching, which identifies both the boundary we don't want to cross and the dynamic that makes the student come alive with desire to learn. A desire that will sustain a lifetime of self-directed learning. Another example that arose in our conversation was psychoanalysis. The goal of psychoanalysis is to shake up your ego defenses enough to get your conscious and unconscious minds to communicate with each other. The goal of psychoanalysis, said one of my colleagues, is to be disquieted, and to develop the skill of holding that negative feeling of disquiet. To be able to hold space for disquiet, moreover, while talking about it with someone. Our cultural habit of automating everything left and right affects how we set boundaries and manipulate contexts. Often we set boundaries that allow us to avoid feelings that we fear or dislike. We want them to go away. One of my colleagues cited the criticism, well, we don't tell chemists not to work with dangerous materials. I did a little internet search on that statement and discovered that chemists have their own opinions about what materials they will and will not work with. They set their own boundaries, assessing the risk against the potential reward. Physicians take an oath to do no harm. They assess the risk of harm against the promise of healing, and also check out their patients' willingness to take certain risks. Discernments of risk like these may bring up fear or other feelings that we don't like. If we set boundaries and try to exclude such feelings, we may instead end up excluding healthy discernment. The most countercultural thing about a church is that we don't lean into automation or values like efficiency and productivity as the wider culture does. In passing, one of us in the group made a remark about ministers being gardeners rather than carpenters. A good carpenter builds something and its dimensions and qualities are set and done. A good gardener nurtures plants to their potential. Their dimensions and qualities are dynamic and growing. There was a thread that ran through our discussions of all three papers, made of several interwoven themes. Each theme, though, was like two sides of a coin, and since it's hard to weave coins, I'll just suggest them briefly. One was the difference between loneliness, which is depleting, and solitude, which can be a space of creativity and renewal. Another was the experience of solitude in community, like the solitude one has during silent meditation in this hour. Another was the difference between feeling pressed together, perhaps not by choice, perhaps lacking privacy, and just being together, relaxed, open, and by choice. Something about each of these coins seems related to the questions of boundaries and skills and what makes the ministry last. Perhaps what all of this points to is the quality of aliveness and growth and nurture that it seems to me is necessary to all the things that make a ministry last. Here we lean more into the learning and mutual care that makes a full human life than we do into the efficiency and productivity that make a competitive business. When we care for one another or when we learn, there can be some discomfort, vulnerability, revealing parts of ourselves we might rather hide or not acknowledge. In the safe context of care and learning, with a spirit of friendship and community, we know how to hold that discomfort with love and dignity. And the more we do it, the better we know it. Because a context of care and learning has boundaries that allow the necessary discomfort involved in learning and becoming more of our best selves more of the time, to bring more light and warmth of love into the world. So may we continue to do what we do so well, learn from and care for each other together. Amen.
So I invite Tom to come forward to extinguish our chalice. And please join in saying the closing words. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all these.
And may we each continue